let's get going on our discussion with some Brown University alum on their advice for all of us about working on the political campaign trail. It's great to have you all with us virtually today. I'm Susan Moffett. I'm the director of the Taubman Center for American Politics and Policy at Brown. And this workshop is part of the Taubman Center series designed to help students explore career options both during and after their time at Brown. And we're so glad today to be joined by a panel of Brown University alumni, all of whom have expertise in the realm of political campaigns. I very much wish we could be having this conversation on campus, so I could be welcoming the Brown alum back to campus. And I hope that we'll be able to hold a second round of this discussion sometime in person in the not too distant future. I'm just going to offer some brief introductions, and then we are going to dive in to the conversation. So joining our panel today is Nate Walton. He is a 2013 graduate of Brown University's Master of Public Policy program. Nate played important roles in Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker's 2014 and 2018 gubernatorial campaigns. He has also served on the Defense Policy Working Group that was part of Mitt Romney's 2012 presidential campaign. He is the founder of Sachem Strategies, which focuses on government relations and business development, and serves as principal for the firm, which is based in Boston and in Washington, D.C. He is also a senior advisor to the Reagan Institute Task Force. Welcome back, Nate. It is great to have you.
Thanks, good to be here.
We are also delighted to welcome back Nina Valadon Santiago, who is a 2016 graduate of Brown's Master of Public Affairs program. Nina also holds a law degree from the Inter-American University of Puerto Rico. In addition to her work on municipal policy, she has worked on a number of campaigns, including Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign. She's testified twice before the United Nations Committee on Decolonization and has advocated for a self-determination process to change Puerto Rico's political relationship with the United States. Nina is currently running for state senate in Puerto Rico. Welcome back, Nina. And also joining our panel is Cassie Foriaras, a 2018 Brown University graduate. Cassie has been active on the campaign trail this year during the 2020 presidential electoral cycle. She worked for Kirsten Gillibrand and Elizabeth Warren in advance of the caucus in Iowa and Super Tuesday in Texas. And she is now looking for opportunities to elect women down the ballot. At Brown, she studied public policy with a focus on gender and education. Welcome back, Cassie. And moderating our panel today is Brown University Public Policy Senior, Asher Layer-Small. In 2018, Asher worked on the Christine Hallquist campaign for governor in his home state of Vermont. Thank you, Asher, for moderating our discussion today. So now that we're rolling, our time together is going to unfold in the following way. Asher will pose some questions to our panelists and engage in conversation for about a half hour or so. And then we'll open up the floor to your questions. We love your questions. If you have a question for our panelists, you can either just type question in the chat box and our moderator, Asher, will call on you to ask your question verbally. He'll unmute you so you can do that. Option number 2 is that you can type your question in the chat box and Asher will read it and pose the question to our panelists for you. One last bit of housekeeping. This panel is being recorded, but just for Brown University students. So those who cannot join us live can learn from your expertise later. And now, welcome to our panelists. The floor is yours. Asher, would you like to begin?
Yes, thank you so much, Professor Moffett, for that introduction. And I think that covers the housekeeping front. Just shoot me a message that says question, or just I've got a question, and I'll put you in a queue for student questions after the initial ones that I'll pose to the panelists. So I think we can dive right in with the first question, and this can be for whichever panelist feels moved to start, and then we can give everyone a chance to jump in as well. We're starting with, what was your process for working on a campaign? How did you get to there, and what led up to that?
First, just want to thank Brown and the Taubman Center for having me here as a part of this impressive group of panelists. And thank you, Professor Moffitt and Sam Griffin, for all your hard work to make this event a reality today, despite challenging circumstances. Really looking forward to this conversation. I've been involved in campaigns at all levels of government, city council, mayor, state legislature, Congress, and the presidency. Also advised campaigns in a variety of roles, such as full-time staffer, consultant, senior advisor, and volunteer. Just given this experience, I think it's fair to say I've seen the good, bad, and ugly electoral process at all levels of government. My specific process for getting involved with the campaign always starts with a clear-eyed evaluation of the candidate. Is he or she an honest person? Do they have the right vision for the office they're seeking? Also, do they have a plan to win? I think you can really tell a lot about a candidate from the type of campaign they're running and who they surround themselves with. So you always have to really weigh the quality of the campaign organization as well. Ultimately, though, I think your decision whether to get involved in the campaign has to really be driven by what's best for you. Does the type of work involved interest you? Are you able to accept a fluid work environment in regard to pay, hours, and position? Are you willing to accept the uncertainty of the outcome on election day? At the end of the day, if you decide to get involved with a campaign, it's a fantastic experience for growth and opportunity. You're serving something greater than yourself. It's very rewarding personally. Like with the exception of the military, there's really not many other fields that allow people in their late teens or early 20s the opportunity to assume such significant operational responsibility. It's a real significant professional benefit to campaign work that will serve you well regardless of whether you make that your full-time career. So those are just some of my initial thoughts.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. So my process for working on a campaign was kind of random, as it is for a lot of folks who work on campaigns. I graduated Brown in 2018, really never envisioned working in government or for campaigns at all, but I did study public policy and specifically did a lot of advocacy and research in the realm of sexual violence prevention. So that was what I was most passionate about in college. And then the year after I graduated, went a totally different route. I was working for a corporation in New York City, doing nothing to do with government or campaign work at all. But unlike in college, when I was very involved in the issues I cared about, I felt that for the year I was working in the corporate sector, I was really on the sidelines. This was the year that Kavanaugh was confirmed to the Supreme Court. It was the year of the 2018 midterm elections when women were elected in record numbers. And for all of those events, I was sitting at a desk, not doing anything to help out campaigns or politics. So I really wanted to switch up what I was doing and work in public service. And right around the time that I decided to switch jobs, Kirsten Gillibrand announced her candidacy. One of her main issues was sexual violence prevention. So I felt really connected to her personally. And for a couple of months, I just tried to get in contact with as many people as possible. I looked on Brown Connect to see alumni who had worked in her Senate office. I went to her rally in New York City and walked up randomly to to staffers there saying that I really wanted to work on the campaign, tried to get them my resume in as many ways as possible. And eventually someone got back to me, and it was a smaller, lower profile campaign than some of the front runners at the time. So I think I got on perhaps more easily without relevant experience because of that. And then I moved to Iowa and then switched to Elizabeth Warren after Kirsten dropped out. So that was my process, basically just contacting as many people as possible and picking a candidate that whose policy platform really aligned with my values.
I have been involved in several campaigns at the local level, at the state level. I think about 7 campaigns at least. But I will focus on the presidential campaign, the 2016 presidential campaign, because I really love the story. I think that you might love it. So my MPA class was the pioneer of the new MPA. So we didn't have many details about how the consultancy will work, and we got them sort of a little bit late. So I was wondering what to do for the consultancy, and I decided to do it for the campaign, for Hillary. The problem is that, as you know, usually internships for presidential campaigns the process to get it is kind of long. So I was running kind of late. So I decided that if it was going to work in some way, I needed to talk with someone in upper management, like the campaign manager that at the time was Robin Hood. So I searched for him all over the internet. I couldn't find him, but I found that he had a free event, a meet and greet in Iowa. I was in Providence, you do remember that. So I checked in the buses, I wouldn't make it on time. I checked on the planes and they were like almost $1,000. So I was without money and sad. And a friend of mine told me like, do you really think you can get it if you talk to him? And I was like, of course. And she was like, well, I just came from Spain, so you can use my miles. So I take my friend's miles, travel to Iowa. Brown was so understanding in letting me leave for this short trip. Helen helped me with the resume and I prepared also some business cards. I arrived to Iowa, straight to the Staples, pick up the resume, pick up the business cards, and head up to this guy. I talked to him and I didn't like quite close the deal. So it was like, well, I will keep trying. But I was able to talk to other people there in the event, like common people like you and me. Next day, I went to a rally that they were having, like a big rally with Katy Perry. And after the rally, they were going to hold the JJ dinner. I'm sure our friend that went to Iowa knows it well. So the JJ dinner is big and expensive to get in. So the cheapest ones were sold when I was like looking for them. And when I arrived, they were no tickets. So I thought, well, I will march because they marched towards the venue. I will march to see how it is on Solidarity. And maybe someone will be reselling tickets like a Super Bowl game. So I went, no one was reselling anything. I was kind of sad, honestly. And honestly, just when I was like going to go down the stairs, I see this sign that says, pick up your tickets here. So I turn, I go there and I say like, are you selling tickets? And they are like, no, we're not selling tickets, but who are you? I was like, well, like I get my business cards out with the Brown logo, without permission, but with the Brown logo, with my JD degree in there that I didn't want to put, and Ellen convinced me. And I explained my quest. I'm here because I support Hillary and I want to get an internship with her and I want to get to the JJ dinner, blah, blah, blah. So the lady asked me, you're really for Hillary? I was like, of course, look, like I have this placard. I was in the rally. She says like, here you go. So she hands me this ticket to get in. I ended up being seated in a $1,000 seat that was owned by a union. The wife of one of the union leaders couldn't make it, so he gave it back in case someone will need it. So I was like having dinner with the union leaders, a table away from Katy Perry, seeing all these people. And I actually met with other people from the day before. And I, like a favor, I took some photos of them with Hillary talking in the background. And well, the event went well. It finished, like all good things. And I noticed that there was a line forming at the back. And I go there and they tell me like, no, the candidates are going to greet the people. And it was packed already. Like I was trying to see where I could, get in. It was packed. But this guy that I met the day before was like a normal person like me, that I took those pictures for him. This guy moves his body and gets me in the line. So there I am, armed with my resume, with my business cards, and with my strong pitch, waiting for her, for the actual candidate. She comes, I was like super nervous, like my Brown cohort, like they were like texting me all the time, like, you got it, you can do this. And I finally got to talk to her. Say like, I'm Nina Valedon, and blah, blah, blah. And she says, well, but if you are enrolled in Brown, she actually saw the business card and took my resume. If you're enrolled in Brown, like how could you manage to work in the campaign? And I explained the consultancy. And she said, well, we will need a lot of help, all the help we can get for those months. So we will call you, don't worry. She gave my resume to her assistant. The assistant gave me her business card, and we started like exchanging messages. So I got the internship without any paperwork. My resume, my hard copy of the resume, it actually got from Iowa to New York to the headquarters. And I got to work at headquarters for 3 months. I wanted to tell you the whole story because I think that it's important to notice that you probably will not get this on your own. You will need the help of many people. And you shouldn't be afraid to seek for that help and to accept it. And just endure, to the process. So that's how I got to work in the presidential campaign. And I'm very happy and very grateful and very humble by the way I got there.
Thank you so much for that story, Nina. That's incredible. So we're actually going to jump right into some participant questions so that it can be a bit more interactive. So I'm going to turn it over to Zoe Butler. Zoe, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to speak with us. It's been really great hearing about how you got into your work. I guess my first question, or my question is, how has Cambridge Analytica and similar targeted propaganda technologies changed your work in terms of elections? Yeah, thank you.
It really hasn't affected the work that I've done at all. Of course, security is always a priority of campaigns, especially because we're dealing with voters' confidential data. But I've done the organizing side of things. So things like digital advertisements and hacks of that sort of data hasn't really affected organizing. We as organizers interact directly with voters. We have access to their information, and we are really careful not to share that information either online through pictures or through email, etc. So it hasn't really affected my work, except to say that there is a level of confidentiality and data security to be aware of.
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo that. I haven't worked directly in campaigns in the last few years, but I continue to advise a number of congressional campaigns across the country. And one of the things I've just found is that compared to 2-3 years ago, just the approach to data is much more professional. And there is much more of a focus on security and protecting that information, as opposed to, as recently as 2016, where it was still a little bit kind of like the Wild West. And I think that partly has to do with just the rising trend of digital becoming, an important part of the campaign, to the extent that often digital leadership is corresponding with leadership of a campaign, but particularly at the presidential level. Whereas, as recently as 2016, it was still kind of like a section of a national campaign, as opposed to being a central component. So that's the biggest change that I've noticed.
In my case, I was actually like an organizer in Florida in the 2016 campaign for Hillary. So that was like I don't want to say the campaign that got hijacked, but let's say the campaign that suffered through this. And I can tell you that, as Casey said, we had access to a lot of information of the voters with the vote builder and with the voting registration documents and all that. But I think that we actually felt an impact in the field world. Like in field, we were trained actually to engage in social media with our volunteers and everyone. So we were actually aiming for the general public, no one in particular, while these other people were aiming to a specific people. And it actually made our digital campaign weaker in that sense. And also, like when we were targeting people in general, we were doing it in a transparent way. Like everyone knew we were working for the campaign. So it was transparent. Like it wasn't something mysterious that will just appear on your Facebook feed. And you could see the impact of those strategies on field, because when we were actually like calling people to ask them for volunteer, to give us like supporter housing and other stuff, you could see the changes in people when they were actually applying those strategies, right? Because people will start like changing their views, and you can track that in the Vote Builder. You can see the change, and it also affected us in a way that these people that were targeted by those strategies were tending to radicalize, right? And when people fell into the darkest of their souls, they don't always keep it to themselves. So when we had volunteers doing the voting registration forms and things like that, sometimes these people will come back at them not in a nice way, and that will impact our recruitment efforts of volunteers and the enthusiasm in general of the volunteers when they were doing voting registration, canvassing, or phone banking. Like you could see that happening because people will just react, like repeating this thing that they were seeing on social media. I think that's like about how I feel that it actually hurt the campaign and what I saw in my end with the people. I think that it also empowered certain emotions in people that actually scared a lot of other people. So that did have an effect on voting participation, I think. And at least from my experience, right? I do remember talking to people on the phones and people telling me like, well, I'm, you know, like how things are, like I'm not going to vote because I'm afraid of something might happen to me when I go to vote. Or like, I hope that nothing will happen because if they lose, we will have a civil war here. So things like that, I do remember hearing normal people that I was like calling on phone banking, telling me like, and not just one, right?
Thank you, Nina. It is interesting. I mean, I also had a lot of time phone banking, and there are some crazy, well, not crazy, you know, it's just a window into the population in a way that is really hard to get otherwise. So thank you for that anecdote. I'm going to turn it over to Maria for the next question. And real quick, just a reminder to all participants that you can just DM me to let me know that you have a question, and I'll put you in the queue. So Maria, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, that'd be great.
Yeah, thank you. So my question is, because of the coronavirus, what do you guys think campaigning is going to look like in the next few months?
It's really hard to say definitively at this point. I mean, I think one thing is clear, it's going to be different than any other campaign in our country's history. I mean, face-to-face contact has historically been so essential to campaign activities, you know, whether it's neighborhood canvassing, fundraisers, political rallies, conventions, you know, it's hard to imagine an American election without them. I think, you know, this year, much of this work will have to be like reimagined. I think every moment of crisis sometimes provides an opportunity for improvement. I think the reality is that many of our political, you know, traditions were growing a bit stale even before the COVID-19 emergency. And so I think this moment provides an opportunity for some fresh thinking about how campaigns reach voters, you know, the necessity of large, expensive events like national conventions, and also how we vote on election day. I don't think this will affect anyway in terms of like how people should get involved. I mean, obviously, you know, it's not as easy just to go to like a campaign office and to volunteer the way that it used to be. But I would actually say that I think that the demand for smart, tech-savvy, you know, young brown students or graduates is going to be more in demand than ever. I think especially as campaigns move online. You know, candidates up and down the ballot, to say nothing of many of their staff, are going to need capable hands to help them navigate these changes. The campaigns are also going to need some creative minds to generate novel ideas on how to leverage technology to break through the noise and impact public opinion. That's definitely going to be a challenge this year, whether it's just shaping public opinion or turning out voters and ultimately winning elections. I think that the whole landscape is going to look very different. So.
This is something that we talk about every day. So basically, what I would say is that despite Corona notwithstanding the current situation, organizing really needs to change in order to keep up with media and digital tactics. So what I noticed in the primary was that things like phone banking or text banking aren't as effective as they used to be. Fewer people pick up the phone, we don't have the correct numbers, et cetera, et cetera. And knocking doors is really the number one strategy to turn out voters and to persuade them to support your candidate. Of course, we can't do that right now. And because phone banking and text banking isn't as effective, I think we really need to think through other strategies to persuade public opinion, as Nate was speaking about, but also just to turn out voters, make sure they know they can vote absentee. Hopefully they'll be able to vote by mail. And so in the campaign world, we're speaking a lot about relational organizing. So leveraging people's personal networks and personal relationships so that if you reach one voter, they can then reach their 20 closest friends or neighbors. This was the strategy that Pete Buttigieg's campaign used a lot in Iowa for this caucus. It was revolutionary. No campaign had really done it before, and it worked out for them. They ended up winning the Iowa caucus. So I think we need to think through leveraging personal relationships rather than just cold texting every registered voter from now until November. And I'll say, even though the situation with Corona is kind of up in the air, it could end a month from now, we could be at home for the next several months, pretty much every campaign staffer I've talked to at the management level is writing one plan for us being able to go outside a month from now and another plan for completely remotely campaigning through November. So you really have to think in both extremes.
Yeah, I totally agree with Nate and Casey. I think that we will, like, you can see it already, all the candidates, we are desperate trying to master remote campaigning. We're trying to replicate the dynamics of town halls and corner store visits and that magic that you get there, but it's very difficult. Like you can see it, like even the last, the Facebook Live that Bernie and Biden did for the endorsement, they were actually trying to look unscripted and natural because they are not getting that outside. So I think that in the next campaign, we will need to step up our game in vote by mail, which like most campaigns don't get it right. And it's very susceptible to fraud and other things. So if you're looking to check what skills do you need to have and what things you should know before, you should actually like start reading about vote by mail in the state that you want to get to work, and voter rights and all these other things that are part of the campaigns, but sometimes we don't see them as important because we focus on film.
Thank you, Nina. So for the next question, I'm going to turn it back to Zoe Butler, who has a follow-up question.
Hi, so this one's for Nate. I was wondering if when you are consulting congressional campaigns, do you ever turn down clients who come to you and that reach out to you? And if so, like, what is your criteria for turning down clients?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, like, the biggest thing is viability, right? I mean, I actually got a call from a congressional candidate last week who's running for a seat here in Massachusetts. The person just doesn't really have, the background I think would be a good fit for the district. Also running against a very well-liked and kind of, strongly positioned incumbent who was very strong in fundraising. So this person asked and called to see if I could help them with fundraising. And it was a difficult decision because it seemed like a good person, like otherwise had a good background, he'd served in the military and served in some local office, but at this late point had not really done the preparatory work that you need to do to kind of build a network to run a campaign, right? And I think that's another question too, is the question of timing. And, and that can sound like overly cynical, right? Because I think that we all have this idea that, people can kind of jump into a campaign last minute and maybe especially in this day and age, harness new digital tools to kind of create a lot of visibility, but ultimately still across the country, because districts are drawn in such a way that most incumbents are safe, it remains difficult to kind of launch a long shot campaign, particularly, this late in the cycle. So, it's just one example of how I evaluated, that particular candidate. I would say for the most part, like, when campaigns reach out to me, I always try to direct them to someone who can be helpful. So maybe if it's not like the best use of my time to work for someone who doesn't really have a great chance of winning, I'll try to direct them to someone else who maybe could, who's more focused on local campaigns in that sense, who can be helpful. So.
next question is coming from Noah Glickman. Noah, you mind unmuting yourself?
Yes. Hi guys, thanks so much. So I'm working on a state Senate campaign in Northern Rhode Island right now. And she's a progressive candidate in a pretty rural district that went for Trump in 2016. And so I was wondering, one, what are some strategies that you've seen to sell progressive messages in these types of districts? And two, kind of going back to Maria's question, knocking doors has always been the most effective way to reach these voters in the district. But without that, can you talk maybe more about other strategies or even more about relational organizing?
This is a situation we see all the time. I've worked in 7 to 8 counties in Iowa, all of which were Obama to Trump counties. And one of my biggest volunteers is also running for state Senate in a very rural county. I think a strategy that she uses when she's speaking to voters is, number one, telling her personal story. So as a volunteer or staffer, talking about your personal story, whether it be about healthcare, about immigration, any kind of issue that you can tie personal experiences to, so that you're relating to voters, not on policy, but on personal values. And so she tries not to bring politics into it at all. She tries to speak about her own experiences, the values she holds, the issues she sees in the district, and then how that can relate, how that leads well into her candidacy. But I think on relational organizing, what I would do right now, if I were working on a state Senate campaign, is try to host a regular weekly Zoom call, invite your most loyal volunteers or supporters, and hard ask them to bring 5 of their closest friends every single time. And not just ask if they'd be willing or ask if it were possible, but really be like, we need you to bring 5 friends, and 2 days before the event, follow up with them, ask who they're bringing, and then that way you can just get new people in the door. That's what I would do if I were campaigning right now. There's only so much you can do virtually, but kind of along those same lines, ask the main supporters to text their closest friends, make a Facebook group, and establishing some kind of normalcy with a weekly or recurring event, I think will bring new people in the door over time.
You cannot focus on partisan affairs. You have to focus on people's affairs, and you have to be able to relate to them in an honest way. I think that this election will be more in districts like that. I have some municipalities like that. It's more about vision of what can we build together and what we can do and what needs to be done, than going after the incumbent from the other party. If you do that, you will hurt yourself, and you will not create the atmosphere to actually be successful. I think that you have to hit hard on digital, and I wouldn't underestimate like text messages and phone calls, because for me in my campaign, in my district, like the game changer in my campaign was that I use strongly personalized text messages with people. So I actually text message everyone from my personal phone number, with my personal phone number. So they can actually build a direct relationship with me, not just with my staff or volunteers, with me. So I think that a little bit of that will help people sort of like forget that you are not from the same party, because you will be someone that they know.
Yeah, this is something I don't have as much direct experience with, but I think that just as someone who's always been fascinated by campaigns and studied them closely, I mean, I think 2 examples to look at, one which was a little bit more recent, but one in the more distant past, is first, Obama's campaign in 2008. I mean, it's easy to look back at that now and kind of see it as a fait accompli given the state of the economy in 2008 and the strength of his campaign. But as late as like 2 months before the election, there was real concern that he may not be able to kind of convince some of those rural voters in places like Iowa, Michigan, Wisconsin to come over to his side. And he was really kind of an early pioneer, his campaign, of relational organizing and kind of telling his personal story as a way to connect to people in those states. And I remember personally myself, I did a lot of traveling during that time period in kind of early days of being a campaign consultant around the country. I remember traveling to Ohio and Indiana, and you turn on the radio and he would have ads with, friends and neighbors talking about why they supported him. And and kind of echoing his biography and how it had connections to, the Midwest and that type of thing. So I think it is really important to kind of get down on the personal level and to connect with people individually. I think other campaigns that really replicated that model successfully is if you look at a lot of the Democrats who won in 2018 in swing districts, particularly in the Midwest and rural parts of the country, they did very well by, again, telling their personal story and connecting issues to voters' everyday lives. So I think that, those are examples to look at, particularly given that the swing states this year will again be, in those kind of Rust Belt states, among others, but particularly those. So.
Yeah, thank you all. And a reminder to students and participants that you can keep DMing me with questions. The next one is going back to Maria for a follow-up question.
Thank you. So this one is to Cassie. You started off talking about how it might have been easier to get a job on a relatively smaller campaign without like the necessary experience. So I guess I'm just wondering what you think that experience is. And like as a recent Brown graduate, what were some things you did at Brown or you wish you'd done that could help you get that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to clarify what I said before, I don't think you need campaign internships or campaign experience in order to work full time. I just think in this primary cycle, there were so many candidates, so many high profile candidates that getting right onto Elizabeth Warren's campaign or another high profile campaign without having worked on a campaign before would have been hard. So I'm glad that I started on a lower profile. I think the things that helped me at Brown were volunteer management in whatever capacity. So I worked for SAFE at Brown, and part of that job was managing volunteers and peer trainers. So I think just that experience of both being friends with people, but also getting them to do work, holding folks accountable is pretty applicable to campaigns. You're working with volunteers that you form really deep relationships, as Nina was speaking about. So just that ability to hold folks accountable, ask them to do things while also being there as a friend and as an emotional support was helpful. I loved the classes I took in public policy because they were really applied. So I think campaigns are some of the most, one of the most applied ways that you can work in politics or in the current political world, because every day you are speaking to voters, you are actually making the things happen. And so at Brown, my favorite classes, the ones that are most applicable to that, are the ones where we did case studies or we wrote policy memos or we're looking at current events. So I always preferred the more applied public policy classes like Professor Moffitt's, as opposed to the theoretical ones about history or political theory. But that was a personal preference that I think ended up helping me a lot.
Awesome. Thank you, Cassie. And I'm going to add a pre-submitted student question that I think is related to this. It's just whether you all as panelists have recommendations to students if they are looking to get involved in campaigns, whether there might be a way or whether we should start in local campaigns and then then move to larger ones, or what your take is there. And Nina or Nate, if you want to jump in first.
I'll jump in on that. I think it depends probably on your interests and available opportunities based on where you're located. If you're really interested in national and global affairs, presidential campaign is a great fit. If you want to make impact locally, consider getting involved in a mayoral run or a city council race or even a gubernatorial or congressional campaign. I think one thing to remember though is that the higher the level of the campaign, with the exception maybe of kind of a bootstrap primary campaign at the presidential level, usually the higher the level of the campaign, the less access you generally have to the candidate and the senior staff. Sometimes by getting involved in a lower level campaign, you have the opportunity of these type of interactions, which can be really enriching. This type of access and visibility is also a great thing if you're thinking long term, especially as an elected official or some of their senior operatives, as their career progresses, those may be great contexts for you to develop, as you've, given that you've had closer interaction with them kind of earlier on. So that's something just to consider in terms of, weighing those choices. So.
Thank you, Nate. Nina, do you want to jump in? I think you might be muted, sorry.
I think you can get valuable experience at the local level and at the national level. But the real question is experience for what? What do you want to do after that? How does that experience will help you build the story that you want to tell about yourself professionally, like as a public official? I think that's a very important question that you have to ask yourself before jumping into one or other race. And you should have your own game plan. Like for me, I consider it very important to build a strong local network so I can go back and forward and consolidate and actually run for office. So for me, the 10 years that I spent doing local politics has really like paid off now that I'm a candidate. So you have to really ask yourself, like, what do I want to do? Like in this, like you're probably like 20 something. The things that you decide on now will really have an impact on your life. So I think that that's the real question that you have to ask. And of course, like a local campaign will allow you to be closer to the game changers. So that could be really good. You could find a really good mentor there. But at the national level, they are just so many resources, like so much training and other stuff that you can tackle on. And you can tackle on also in a national network if you do it right. So it's really has more to do with what you want to do than what it will do on its own for you.
Thank you, Nina. Cassie, you want to chime in as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I would echo what's been said. I think you have a higher level of autonomy, a higher level of access on state level and local campaigns, but there's so much demand for staffers on presidential campaigns, especially now. Another thing I would add is that working for the candidate's campaign itself is not the only way to impact campaigns. There are a lot of very credible, highly valued tangential organizations that might be a good inroad. I would suggest the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. They are a branch of the DNC that basically assigns a staffer to highly valued congressional campaigns across the country. So that's a good inroad. Working for an organization like Organizing Together, which is a totally third-party nonprofit type thing that's training campaign staffers in preparation for the general. Also working with state parties. So for instance, I'm in Iowa and I will likely end up working for the Iowa Democratic Party because they will be working closely with the Senate campaign here, as well as the presidential all the way down the ballot. So I view the way to make the most impact is by working for the state party and then advocating for all of the campaigns up and down the ballot. So you can work for candidates themselves, but especially to make an inroad at the start, I think looking at tangential organizations could be helpful as well.
Great, thank you so much, Cassie. So another pre-submitted student question that I think is relevant to a lot of us. This is specifically as Brown alums, what were some of the resources that you all took advantage of that you think were most important in helping you get to where you are now? And Nate, if you want to kick us off, that would be great. I think you might be muted still, sorry.
Yeah, well, I mean, Brown is obviously an incredible academic institution with so much to offer students. It goes without saying, but it's important to make the most of your experience here because it's a unique time in your lives to expand your horizons and acquire knowledge that will be useful as you prepare for possible work in a campaign. I'll just echo what Cassie said. I mean, I think that courses and events in public policy and politics, particularly when it comes to applied politics, offered by the Watson Institute and the Taubman Center are fantastic resources to deepen your knowledge and understanding of topics related to electoral politics and campaigns. I think it can also be helpful just to kind of broaden your understanding by taking classes in political theory, and if you're interested in foreign affairs, taking classes along those lines as well. Take the time to develop relationships with great professors like Professor Moffitt, who did so much to help deepen my interest in legislative processes, which is something that I still use today. Brown's just a vibrant community, and I think, with a rich history of student activism. And so, I mean, to this end, I really encourage you to get involved with campus groups, whether it's focused on causes that on campus or in the broader Providence community. this is just a great way to kind of hone your skills and get involved in advocacy organizations. So that's definitely something I would strongly encourage as well. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Nate. Cassie, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think for campaigns specifically, this is, I think, one downside is a lot of jobs you find out about through word of mouth. So I think it's a lot easier to make an inroad or get a job because you know a friend of a friend of a friend rather than applying cold online, which thousands of people probably do. So I would just try to speak to as many people at Brown, alumni, professors, people in the wider Rhode Island community working for the Rhode Island government, and just see what experiences they've had and who they know. I remember when I was first trying to get on Kirsten's campaign, I looked on Brown Connect. I think I emailed Professor Moffitt, Professor Ehrenberg, Professor Chait. I wish I had done more of working for the Rhode Island legislature and perhaps the mayor's office, et cetera, in college. I hadn't really done that sort of stuff, but just trying, there's so many smart, qualified people who have done things outside of academia at Brown. So speaking to the people who have different experiences and just trying to expand your network as much as possible.
Awesome. Thank you, Cassie. And Nina?
Well, I love my time in Brown. I think it was like a game changer for me. I'm very grateful for that. I think the faculty is great. The staff is great at Taubman, like Melissa, Ellen, like just everyone. And I really love like Professor Moffitt class. It really helped me to have like a systematic way of approaching to issues. So I value that a lot and I use that a lot. Another class that was like great for me was crisis management. That class has come in handy every day in Puerto Rico for the last 3 years. I at the time I wasn't that happy because I wanted to deal more with like political crisis, not like natural disasters. But it has come in handy. And the same thing with the other communications class that the MPA was offering. That was you actually got to do like your campaign portfolio. And we had at the time of my MPA the opportunity to take a leadership course with Marshall Gantz. That was amazing because he actually teach us the basics that we use in relational organizing. So the study of you, the study of us, and the hard ask, right? So that's something that I use in every speech I make. So I think it was worth the day of trying. It was deeply emotional. But I wanted to say that you should think about the skills in a way that you can translate them into campaign skills. For example, someone that works in human resources could be a great addition to a campaign team as a trainer, right? Like don't focus just like in organizing or this very specific stuff. You probably have like a lot of skills that you can translate in things that we do in campaigns every day, and you will be needed. So I think that's important to do that, to actually like read the job descriptions and see, I might be a good fit for this, and build your resume with experiences that maybe are not partisan, but will talk to the campaign.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nina. And also, I'm realizing with you as a panelist, we get this great resource of also getting to speak to someone who's simultaneously running a campaign as well. So I wanted to go to another student-submitted question that just asks how you've gone about staffing your campaign, how you found folks to do that.
I will be very candid. How you staff your campaign has a lot to do of how much money do you want to spend on your campaign. That's the first question. For me, the answer was very simple. I want to spend the less. Because the more money you take, you know what happens. So I'm actually trying to run a very presence intense campaign. Most of the people that help me out are they are all volunteers, but they are like party insiders, like local party leaders, and like just has Nate do this like viability assessment of his prospective clients. They do the same for you. Like each of them, when you meet them, they do the same assessment, and it's very competitive to get them. But it's basically how we run campaigns in Puerto Rico. It's often the only campaigns that actually have like paid staffers in Puerto Rico are the campaigns for the candidates for governor. So that's how we basically roll. And I was able to get people from my personal network, not only political, but for other causes that I work for. I was able to receive recommendations from friends and also from the mayors. I think that sometimes in the United States, they don't see mayors as important figures, but mayors know people and they move people and they have like strong connections because they are closer. So I was able to use that in my advance because I won the endorsement of 9 of the 10 mayors of my district.
Thank you, Nina. So the next question is one that I think anyone who has had some experience in a campaign will be like, oh yes, this is important. It's just survival tips, because we know that it can be long days and sometimes many days in a row. So to turn over maybe to Cassie first, and then we can go through all the panelists. Just what are some survival tips to working on a campaign?
Good question. It's very exhausting. I would say the first thing that came to mind is especially from having worked in rural areas, and as an organizer, you're responsible for your own little corner, and you might be the only person there. Something that really changed my experience about halfway through was that I would go to my region all day long, work in a coffee shop by myself, meet with voters and caucus goers, but other than that, like not really have peer-to-peer interaction. And a few months in, I started doing that during the day, but going back to my office at night and working with our more urban organizers, making phone banking with them, and then going to get dinner with them after work. And it just totally changed my experience. Even though I perhaps lost out on a little bit of productivity by not being in my own area 24 hours a day, just the peer-to-peer interaction, being able to do the grueling phone banking with other staffers just makes it so much more fun. So I would say don't isolate yourself, get together with other people as much as possible, even if it means traveling a bit, driving a little bit to go to other regions. Also just getting enough sleep, eating. We talk about self-care a lot on campaigns, and it's real. At the end, I was working like 12-hour days, 7 days a week. And that's just not sustainable unless you're really taking care of yourself.
For sure. Thank you, Cassie. Nate?
Yeah, I mean, I think as first, it's important to identify aspects of a campaign that interests you, whether it's like field work, fundraising, or policy work, but remain willing to accept jobs in other areas. The beginning of a campaign is very much like a startup, and there's an all hands on deck approach, which requires flexibility. Campaigns can be very fluid, so I think, if you are flexible, it's probably going to be rewarded in the long run. If you want to work for a certain candidate or operative or tangential group, I'd be open to taking whatever opportunity you can get to get your foot in the door. Excuse me. Once you've proven your value through hard work, there's a very good chance that the specific role that you might prefer will become available to you eventually. I think the best thing about campaigns, in my opinion, is that they're very accessible and are a great equalizer. Anyone can sign up to volunteer and help by knocking on doors, assisting with digital outreach, or helping with voter turnout activities. And so I think it's also just really important to remember to have fun. I mean, campaign work is obviously a job, so it's important to take it seriously, but campaigns can be so much more enriching than a normal job you might have, especially just right out of college. For my campaign work, I was able to visit all 50 states, interact with senior leaders in government, and witness historic events in real time, all before the age of 25. So, it's not very lucrative work in the beginning, but the experiences and network that you gain are incomparable to other job opportunities that you have at your age. So, campaign experiences also just widely respected within, I think, other sectors. So it can be a great stepping stone into a variety of other fields. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Nate. Nina, do you want to chime in too?
Yeah, I think that you should be very sure of what you want. Research all the options available. Like, you should apply for the job that you want, because the probability is that you will not be able to change departments or be promoted. Like, promotions, as you know, are like reserved sometimes for the people that actually started from the very early part of the campaign. So it's not that easy to get there. Be sure that you have every bit of the job offer in writing, in the contract. If it's not there, you should ask for them to put it there, or you should have a plan B. For example, housing, gasoline money, travel expenses, health insurance, 3 days. This is talking from experience. Don't be afraid to speak up if something is not going how it is supposed. For example, if the terms of the contract are not being followed, if there's a hostile environment, if there's like sexual harassment or discrimination or things like that. Like, don't be afraid. You will not end up in a blacklist. The other thing I wanted to say is that remember that with some people, you will have to strike a balance between excelling and not making feel them unsecure, that you will, steal their job. With others, you will be able to learn, and they will allow you to grow, to even surpass them. But you should really know with whom you're dealing with, because you will find everything. Very important. Be kind, always. It's a very stressful job. Like, we are all like in the tip of a nervous breakdown during the campaign. So just be kind. Help out in any project. Be a team player, right? And never forget that we're dealing with people, and the important thing is the connections that you are creating, the real meaningful connections. Don't burn bridges, because we get cranky some days in organizing. It's tough.
Great, thank you, Nina. So just to make sure that all participants have been able to ask the questions that they want to, I want to open the floor again to any student questions, and oh yeah, Matthew, you want to jump in? Sorry, it looked like there was audio coming from you, maybe not? Okay, well, if any student wants to interrupt me, feel totally free. But to move on to one next question, this one was another pre-submitted question specifically for Cassie, and it's, how did the primary and caucus app situation in Iowa influence organizing throughout the rest of the primary?
Yeah, sure. For those of you who don't know, the reporting in Iowa, the results didn't come back as quickly as expected to. There was some kind of reporting issue. I would say that this affected things because of momentum that was lost. So a lot of people attribute Obama's win in 2008 to him unexpectedly winning the Iowa caucus. On the night of, he gave a now very famous speech. His fundraising spiked. People viewed him as a really viable candidate after that, whereas before he was kind of considered the underdog. And a lot of people say that if he hadn't won Iowa, he wouldn't have gone on to win the nomination back in 2008. I think this time around, because there were no results right away, the people who did really well in Iowa couldn't as effectively leverage that momentum. So Pete was sort of an underdog on the national landscape. He won Iowa, but he didn't have that big fundraising bump or momentum bump that he might have had if the results had come back on time. Bernie and Elizabeth Warren were 2 and 3. And again, from having worked on the Warren campaign, I didn't really feel like that Iowa victory of being in the top 3 was as reported, because the main story was that the Iowa caucus app broke and that Iowa was broken. So I think it kind of hurt the candidates that did well. Personally, it was just sort of deflating. I mean, we had been in Iowa for the better part of a year working toward this victory, and then to not have the results was just personally disappointing. And it felt like the world wasn't seeing the tangible work that we had put in. I was immediately deployed to Texas about a week later, and I just could feel myself like totally down in the dumps, much less energy than I had before. Maybe it was because I was exhausted, but I also just think that weird end had something to do with it. Moving forward, it's affected Iowa specifically because the chair of the Democratic Party here, Troy Price, had to resign after the situation. And Iowa has been a caucus state for a long time. It's been first in the country for a long time. That's up in the air now, whether that will continue. And for the general, Iowa is a swing state, and now the leadership has been totally overturned. And I know that the new leadership is working really hard to reestablish structure so that we can hopefully win in the general. So it's affected a lot of different things.
Thank you, Cassie, for giving a bit more detail on that point. I know this was specific to Iowa, but Nate or Nina, do either of you want to chime in on this question?
Yeah, I was actually in Iowa for the caucus. Being the political junkie that I am, I had some clients that were interested in kind of going out and seeing the process in person. So we went out to the eastern part of the state, in Dubuque and Davenport, and we got to sit in on some caucuses. And it was interesting to see. I mean, I think that the system for counting at the local level, it was actually quite efficient in terms of how each precinct captain for every campaign counted the ballots. I mean, I think it definitely was a failure on the statewide level, and you could see how everyone in the room was extremely frustrated to not have the results that they were looking for, which is too bad because hard work by Cassie and others. The campaigns were really well organized, and so hopefully that's something they can improve moving forward.
For sure. Thank you, Nate. Nina, were you going to jump in as well?
I think that from my short time there, I learned that people in Iowa, and I keep talking to some of the people I met there, they are so proud of being first in the nation. They are just so proud of that. And I think that it hurt them in their soul to have this messy situation. And it also hurt the credibility of the caucus system, of the overall election night. So I think that that's a thing to take into account when we are exploring new ways of using technology in the voting system, because like the voting system is just so fragile that any little thing can hurt it badly.
Thank you, Nina. Yeah. Before we kind of move towards wrapping up and asking for any final comments, I wanted to open the floor one more time just in case a student wanted to jump in with a question. But if not, maybe we can just go around to each panelist, perhaps starting with Cassie, and just if you have any final advice or comments that you wanted to leave participants with about campaign life, campaign work, etc.
Yeah, one thing I haven't said yet is that everyone should volunteer on campaigns. We always need volunteers, especially now in this weird time. If you're at home a lot between classes, everyone needs help text banking and phone banking. You can sign up online for almost any candidate. Also, I'm happy to continue conversations, especially with people who are graduating and looking to get on a campaign this summer. I'll post my email in the chat box, but happy to answer additional questions. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here, Cassie. Nate, do you want to jump in?
Sure. One thing I wanted to speak to, which was, one of the questions that we had talked about beforehand was, the best way to reach out to get involved with the campaign. And I think that that's, definitely I want to be my party message because, I mentioned it before, it's just really important, even if you don't necessarily have, the connections right now, just to reach out and try to get involved. I didn't personally have any family or personal connections to help me get involved with campaigns. I did what many others in similar position have done when they wanted to get involved, which was just start at the ground level. My first campaign job was actually filling out name tags at events and holding signs to direct people where to park at a rally. I showed an early skill for recruiting others to get involved, and eventually became leader of student political organizations, first on my campus and then on a statewide level. And then while running a grassroots organization, I was able to develop experience from raising money from donors to support our work, and then made use of these networks to create other professional opportunities, such as a role working on defense research contract at Harvard after I graduated from college. I continue to stay involved with the campaigns just from that original experience as a grassroots organizer and fundraiser, and ultimately the combination of this experience, my networks, and a diverse background of skills created the opportunity for me that Professor Moffitt mentioned to serve as a senior fundraiser and defense policy advisor for Mitt Romney's presidential campaign at the age of 26. I was able to build on this visibility and access gained during that experience, as well as a Brown degree, to combine my network built from campaign work with my policy experience to start a consulting firm that advises innovative defense businesses at the cross-section of the public and the private sectors. So anyway, long story short, I think it's just getting started at the ground level, improve yourself, be flexible, work your way up and make your skills transferable. And this will allow you the greatest number of opportunities as your career progresses. I think also just, our system of elections and government certainly has its flaws, but, will only improve if smart, engaged young people like everyone participating today, decide to get involved and make a difference. I think this is especially true this year with everything at stake in the fall elections. There's no better time to roll up your sleeves and make a difference at the state, local, and national level. And I'm certainly happy to help anyone on the line here. Although historically I was involved more in Republican campaigns, I've since kind of evolved in a different direction as the Republican Party has changed from my involvement, 7 or 8 years ago. And I have great relationships on both sides of the aisle. So I'd be happy to help anyone who's interested in getting involved. So.
Thank you so much, Nate.
Mm-hmm.
And Nina, any final remarks?
First, it was like a privilege to be with all of you having this conversation. Very jealous of not being able to be in Iowa like you guys. But I think that for me, organizing and campaigning, it's a very humbling experience. You actually get to see things that you wouldn't see otherwise. You get in contact with people that you wouldn't know otherwise. And that prompts questions, deep questions in you, of your motives, of your goals, of if you're doing enough to change the things you don't like. And I think that's a very important part of organizing and politics too. The way the process also changes you as a person. And I think you should be open to that. You should be prepared for that. Because sometimes from field, you will end up in tears because you will confront people that are just in such poverty, right? And that's an important part to consider too of the job. I think that you should never sell yourself short for a campaign, that you should be shy, but you should be confident, and you should always have something to show. Please always remember that every person that you meet is a person that you can help. Like the people that help me. Maybe it's a little thing for you, but it could mean a lot for your volunteer or your intern or your fellow organizer. And those people that you met too, they are also able to help you out in the future. So remember always to be kind, to give all of your heart to it, and open up, be prepared, give it all, push through, even if you're very scared or mad or sad, or you want to quit, don't quit. Ask help when you need it, and just let all the other people also feel empowered while joining politics.
Thank you so much, Nina, and thank you to all of the panelists for sharing your experiences, sharing some tips and tricks, and also just as someone who's also worked on a campaign before, it's very gratifying to be able to hear some of the common experiences. So a really sincere thank you for being here today, especially when we're all remote these days and it's really hard to come together. It means a lot to be able to have events like this. So thank you, and thank you for your time and expertise.
And I think one of the main takeaways from our conversation today is the importance of staying in touch. So I hope that everyone who has joined us live today and everyone who will be joining the recording later will we'll just stay in touch as we move forward in our political space. Thank you all for taking the time, for sharing your expertise, and I look forward to being able to reconvene in person and continue our conversation. Thank you.